50 millimeter is my most used focal length. It's what I'm shooting this video on right now, and there's 5 different 50 millimeters sitting over there. That's a lot. That's too much. But I want to talk about why it's my favorite, why I use it so much, and where it fits into the broader spectrum of my photography. What's up? My name's Chris Tejas. I'm a photographer and videographer based in Ontario, Canada. I mainly shoot portraits, events, weddings. Basically, if there is a person, I'm going to photograph them. And 50 millimeter has been my most used focal length from the time I was 13 years old and I picked up my first Minolta X370 up until right now, this minute, filming on this camera. I'm not saying it's the best focal length. I'm not saying it's the most convenient or the most flexible focal length. I'm just saying it's the one I have used so much, and it's how I tend to see the things that I photograph. And that's something people say a lot about the 50 millimeter, which is that it's like the field of view that people see it. And that is just not true. Like, if I am looking right now, I'm not seeing 50 millimeter of focal length. I'm seeing much beyond. If I only saw that, then the world would be a complicated place to navigate because you wouldn't have very good peripheral vision. But the idea, the sentiment behind it does sort of ring true for me, because for me, I think it's actually more to do with the fact that like I started on a 50 millimeter and I've used it so much that now when I look at a scene, I know right away what 50 millimeter is going to look like for me. Having said that, I kind of know that for all of the focal lengths that I use regularly, which would be like, 24, 28, 40, 50, 85, even 135, I feel pretty confident in at this point. So I don't think there's a ton of merit to the idea that like this is what you see, but I do think there's merit to the idea that the more you use a particular focal length, the more you will see in it. Now, why do I have so many different 50 millimeters? Well, they're for different systems. First of all, I have one for Canon. I have 3 for Nikon. I have 1 for Minolta. Maybe I have 4 for Nikon. The whole idea being that each of them is sort of playing into a different strength. And I have one that's a macro, one that is a fully manual lens. I have like a nifty 50. What we're using right now is the 50 millimeter f1.8S from Nikon, and it is definitely the best 50 millimeter I've had at a 1.8 for sure. I would say like the 1.2s that you get from like Canon and Sony and Nikon are all really beautiful as well, but they come at a higher price point. So as far as nifty 50 goes, this one is pretty stellar. But really, I'm just making this little bite-sized video to talk to you about when a 50 millimeter makes sense, when you would maybe want to pull that out, and when you would look to something different, either something that's wider or something that's more telephoto, and how you can approach your photography using 50 millimeters. First and foremost, for me, it is my go-to focal length for portraits. I love it for portraits because it allows me to get close enough to the subject that I'm not like super far away like I would be with an 85 or 135, where it can be difficult to actually communicate effectively. But you can also get some context and some environment. If you get close enough, you can blur things out really beautifully if you're at 1.8 or 1.4 or 1.2, but you can still get some context of the environment if you back up a little bit too. So I think it's like a really, really great all-arounder. Beautiful for full body. It doesn't distort the face or the body too much. And it is just like a very good go-to focal length. And so for me, for portraits, I would say if I look back at my portraits, they're probably like 90% with a 50 millimeter, or like, the Sony 55 millimeter, or like some 40 millimeters as well. But in that spectrum, the 50 millimeter really just sings for me when it comes to portraits. Next for me would be street photography. And I kind of waffle in between 28 millimeters and 50 millimeters for my street photography. I do really like using 40 millimeter as well, but 50 millimeter is the most common that I will use, and it allows me to get the type of photography that I really like for street. It's not necessarily providing quite as much context or environment as you would get out of a 28 millimeter. Maybe you can't do quite as much layering because you don't have the space, but I do think the 50 millimeter works really well for me. It allows me the right amount of distance from the things that I'm photographing so that I feel like I am not influencing the scene too much, and I can still get really great quality photos and get the style of photos that I want without having to interact to the degree that my presence is changing what's happening. Another place I really like to use it, and this probably doesn't seem super common for a lot of people, but is in like landscape or environmental photographs. A lot of people will go quite wide, or they might go more telephoto. For me, 50 millimeter seems to work really, really well. I like the way that 50 millimeter looks when it comes to this kind of thing, because oftentimes it looks like just what I think I'm seeing or how I would want to frame things. And so that means that For me, landscape photography is a lot about like getting people to feel as though they're in the photograph. And so the best way I can do that is by showing them what it really looked like to be there. And you can't always do that with a 50mm, but I do find that it works quite well in that scenario. I will say, as a wedding photographer, 50mm does end up on my camera for a lot of the day. I shoot a ton of the getting ready, a ton of the portraits, a good amount of the like cocktail hour, some of the reception, late night stuff. I'm doing all of that on a 50mm, but it is not in any way like the best for that. I think there's times where it's too tight. In getting ready spaces, oftentimes I bump to like a 24 or 28, 35mm, something like that, because it's just a little bit too tight. For things like dance floor, it's definitely not the right choice. You know, I go nice and wide on the dance floor because I like that look. You can get away with it, I guess, if you're far enough away, but I like to be in the action. So for anything where you want to be really intimate and in the action and you want to be able to show some context, 50mm is just not necessarily the best choice. What I will say, when you are shooting with a 50mm, the thing that I think is going to be really helpful is to take some time to actually look at the frame that you want to compose beforehand, and then pull up the 50mm and see if it's showing you the same thing. If it is, you know that you have a good sense of where 50mm is going to fall for you when it comes to what you're looking at. Right now, I can look around the room and I can say, okay, I can look at my bookshelf and say, I know exactly where 50mm is going to get me with this. I can pull up the camera and I bet I'm going to be pretty much right. But that only came out of a lot of practice. And so I would highly encourage you, 50mm is like the cheapest, easiest thing to get. It's probably a pretty simple optical formula for them to make, so they can make them very cheaply, and there's so many used ones. Go out there and get a 50mm and just stick that on your camera for like a month or two and just only shoot with that and see what that gets you. Make it 3 months, make it a year. I mean, like I said, it was the only lens I had for probably 3 or 4 years when I first started. It's the lens I took all my photos on to get me my portfolio to go to university for photography. It is the lens that I learned on. And so I would highly encourage you to think about that. I will put some of the ones that I really like that I've used in the past in the description below, and you can see what you think. There's going to be one for pretty much all the major brands there, and I would be very curious, how you feel about 50mm. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's overrated? Do you think it's underrated? Are you a 35er? Are you a 85er? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below, and we'll talk soon. Peace.